Welcome back to another episode of PPK. I don't know, boys. It's a little weird.
Are you guys seeing what we're seeing right now?
Are you seeing what we're seeing? We are 3 in one studio. A little bit of life-changing events, right, Keone?
Yeah, we literally just moved to Arizona this past weekend. So what better way to start off the vibes by getting all 3 of us in the studio
For the first time in a year.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have some, lighting's not, perfect right now.
Yeah,
but
we're working on it.
We got new studio stuff. We got that camera. How you doing, Keone? Talk to that one right there real quick. How's it going over there?
Good to see you.
And, we're improving, we're grooving, and let's get it started.
Yeah, we're excited to be back again. Hopefully you're enjoying the consistency underneath the World of Blaze platform. So happy to be here, excited to be here, happy to be back in studio with all 3 of the boys in the flesh. So for this one, I mean, I think it's appropriate that we kick it over to Keone.
Welcome back, baby.
Welcome
Seriously,
back.
huh?
As we talk about the topic, because it will be a surprise.
Yeah,
you'll have
they're
no
not
clue.
going to know.
You have
They're
zero
not going to know
clue.
until I say it.
Yeah,
YouTuber lay, and you just click on it.
Keone, what are we talking about today?
So the inspiration for this episode comes from 2 kind of ideas. One is from the book Broken Gods by Dr. Greg Popcak. And the other is from Christopher West and Theology of the Body and the recent training that I actually went to that's been incredibly informative. So I encourage anyone to kind of dive in there if you can, just even get a quick taste of it in any way. So I think something that stood out to me when going through both the book and Theology of the Body is the idea that the things we struggle with, right, the sins that we may struggle with, or even in a general way, as you see the title, the 7 deadly sins, there's actually something deeper there that is good. And I think when I was growing up, you hear the 7 deadly sins, it's like these big monsters that are kind of chasing you, and you got to run away from them as much as you can because they're going to eat you alive, right? So you're like constantly just trying to resist it, right? And I think what Dr. Greg Popcak does in his book and what Christopher West does in Theology of the Body, what he does is say, no, there's a gift underneath all that, right? Christopher West talks about the devil doesn't have his own clay, which means that God made all things good. And so the devil doesn't create evil, he distorts the good. Right, so if we can go underneath that deadly sin, whatever one we might struggle with, or number of ones that we struggle with, we can see what God designs, the longing of our heart underneath that, so we can actually become more in tune and connected to God's grace. And that's something that was a complete shift in just how I viewed my faith, how I viewed the sins, the particular sins that I struggle with, and just kind of understanding, okay, Lord, what is it that you're placing in my heart? The struggle that I have is actually a yearning for you. If I can get in touch with the longing and not run away from it and not be scared of it, then I can actually fulfill it the way it was called to be, which is ultimately in God himself, right? Mm-hmm. And I think this has been a complete shift. So Dr. Greg Popcak, in his own way, he talks about taking on the 3 different, I guess, perspectives when it comes to our yearnings. Okay, he talks about basically the addict, which is we indulge in the desires, right? So whatever it is, we're just trying to consume it as much as we can because our satisfaction comes from those things themselves, right? So you become an addict. The other is you become a stoic. The stoic is you're so out of touch with the yearning that it's almost like you don't have no feelings at all, don't have any desires. You suppress them, right? And the last one that Dr. Greg Popcak talks about is the mystic. And the mystic, to me, it is realizing that the yearnings of your heart are a window to God himself, right? You're in awe of the divine because we were made to become like God, right? Divinized. Christopher West talks about it in a little different way. He likes to talk about what's called in the 1900s. A lot of us were raised in like the starvation diet. He likes to talk about, whereas, we were basically told in a lot of ways, like body bad, soul good, right? So everything that's of the flesh is evil and you need to get rid of it and suppress it. And what happens? There's this great divorce between the body and the soul. And if you think about it, what is actual, the separation of body and soul is death itself, right? And so there's a lot of this idea that we've been completely misinformed, right? As far as how we view the faith. And so Christopher West talks about a lot of us are raised in the starvation diet where we've almost run away from the desires of the flesh and not recognizing what they truly are. That's the whole idea of suppression. That's the Stoic that Dr. Greg Poptic talks about. And then he talks about the other extreme, Christopher West. He talks about the fast food diet. The fast food diet is the addict, right? Who indulges in the desires of the flesh, thinking that they're going to ultimately satisfy you. Right. And then lastly, Dr. Christopher West, he talks about the idea of the third option. And the third option is the eternal banquet. That's the mystic who knows that the beauties of our heart are good, but they're ultimately going to be fulfilled when we're in eternal communion with God himself in the communion of saints. So this stood out to me because it has been a complete shift in how I view the spiritual life, how I view myself and my own body, how I view my desires and my faults. And I think this is something that can be important for all of us to adapt in our own life because we have particular struggles, and how we grapple with them, how we view them can largely shape how we eventually, God willing, overcome them.
Yeah, I mean, this is we're talking about the 7 deadly sins, also known as the 7 capital sins. And I think if we, I think the goal, as we were talking about just preparing for this, is to try to help you guys understand where that desire comes from. So that way you can kind of name it so you can tame it, right? So you can be able to understand that, okay, well, because obviously Christopher West is talking a lot about what Pope St. John Paul II talks about in Theology of the Body. And we talk about that redeeming the eros, right? That desire that, God doesn't make mistakes. I know a lot of people out there try to make that claim, but that desire stems from ultimately, obviously, a desire for God. And so we're going to try to unpack that as we go through each of the 7 deadly sins and really what's at the root of it. And then what's the opposite virtue. So not just bring up the vice, but just talk about how you can actually work on this as a people. Meeks, got anything to add before we get into it?
Let's do it.
All right, let's get into it. So the capital sin of the capital sins is pride. Right, it happens to be what St. Thomas Aquinas calls the queen of all sins. The Catholic Encyclopedia defines it very simply that it's the excessive love of one's own excellence. Right, I don't think I need to explain pride. We see that a lot in our culture today, whether it be athletes, whether it be superstars, where people are just so full of themselves, and we all struggle with this. Let's just be honest, right? That it's something that we typically, even indirectly sometimes, it's self-love, right? So we may be doing a good, for instance, not because it's good in of itself, but because I want the attention that comes with that. I want the affirmation from my friends or from the community, like, oh man, he's a really good guy. And that's a temptation, especially when you're trying to do podcasts and you're trying to preach the gospel and you're trying to evangelize the world. What is the intention? Is it pure or is it self-serving? It's that indirect self-love, if you will. And so there's this temptation. If you look at the underlying desire, it's really this desire for an abundance to fill the void, if you will. The God-sized void, as St. Augustine would call it, right? That the God-sized void that can only be filled by God, instead of us trying to fill it with, world-sized cup, if you will, of the things of this world or the things that kind of puff me up. St. Thomas Aquinas talks about like there's 4 forms of pride that comes up with this, where he says like one is claiming to have this perfection that you don't really have, right? We don't have any of that in the culture today, right? Like people claiming that they have certain, perfections or abilities or talents that they don't really have. And that's all day, every day. You think about Instagram, you think about TikTok, you talk about all of these social media platforms where people present themselves as one way, but they're really another way. There's also, talking about the perfections, having the perfections, but then not recognizing that God gave you those. So I have the ability, that's God-given talent. Booby Miles, all I got to do is show up, right? But not realizing and thanking God for those perfections. The third form is actually recognizing that God gave them to you, but then thinking that he gave them to you because you earned it, because you merited it, because you deserve it, right? That you're so good, John, that God gave you hair, helmet hair.
Lucky you, dude.
Yeah. Lucky,
Congrats.
lucky you. Yeah. Congratulations. You have the world's best coffee for the elf fans out there. And then the last form is really like recognizing, you have the perfection, recognizing that God gave it to you, but not willing to share it with anybody else, right? So the ability to give it to other folks. So what's the opposite virtue of that vice? Quite simply, it's humility. So what is St. Thomas Aquinas? Obviously, you guys know I'm a third order Dominican, so I'm typically going to lean on St. Thomas on this. But he'll say it is, and you've heard Father Chad Ripperger say this, right? Is seeing yourself as you are, nothing more, nothing less. Very difficult in today's world. Why? Because everybody says, man, if you want it, go after it. You can be anything you want to be. And not to diminish people's ambition to chase a dream, but to be realistic with yourself. Not everyone's going to be D1, right? So for those dads out there trying to live vicariously through your kids, it's less than 1%, right? But that is an idea of pride, that I'm going to see myself, see others, my family members, as more than they are. And so humility is a way that we can work against that by seeing ourselves as we are, nothing more, nothing less. Not seeing less of ourselves, but thinking about ourselves less, right, is what you hear it. So C.S. Lewis, just the last thing on this one, C.S. Lewis calls this the anti-God. So pride is a capital of all sins. Anything else you guys have to add on the pride piece?
Yeah, I think just briefly, I think pride is the idea that my worth depends on the excellence that I provide or show. Right? It's when we think about what is when God says that we are called to be perfect, right? We're made to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Pride says that I'm not lovable or worthy or acceptable until I reach that state of perfection. So I'm going to outwill and outwork, right? Outside of God, I'm going to do it, right? Until I get to that road or that end of perfection, and then I'll reach it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the saintly road is the humility in saying, here I am right here in this stage. There's the perfect me that God calls me to be. I realize that there's a lot of gap between that. Humility is saying, Lord, I cannot do it without you. So we open ourselves up as a gift. In our humility, God gives us the grace, we respond. That response pulls us a step forward towards the path of perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Pride says, no. God is not even here. I'm going to earn my way. I'll meet you over there at the end, God, where finally I can be loved. Right? We can fall into this as athletes, as academics, in entertainment. It's this idea that I have to produce something in order to prove my worth.
Yeah, you talked about that way back when on one of the episodes. But the other thing about it, I guess simply stated, is self-reliance. Mm-hmm. It's a temptation towards self-reliance that I got this, I'll do this, I will it, therefore it'll happen. And I think that's where pride steps in. Meeks, anything to add on pride?
Yeah, a wise guy once said, pride is the devil. I think he got a hold on me. Jermaine Cole said that. Anyways, and then a good book to, if you're like struggling with pride, which means you're breathing and alive, read Imitation of Christ, and that'll get you right, dude. So that's a really good one. Another one, I think, form of pride that I think is super prevalent, especially when I'm thinking about sort of my generation, the Gen Zers that aren't sort of practicing the faith, is this like, I guess this idea that maybe you heard a really good argument, or just you heard a argument against maybe like Judeo-Christian values and Western civilization, and like from your professor, and then it's like this, like, aha, I got it, right? So I got this thing that I can't answer, nor do I want to find the answer. It's just such a pride to be able to like lean on like, oh no, I've heard debates against the way that I know would challenge me and really uplift me and elevate the way I live my life. So therefore I get to just sit back. I think that's the biggest pride that we have, in at least in my generation, is that like, that's already been argued. I don't, I just have to live this sort of good life, and I have to manifest things or put out good energy, and I'll get it back. And so I think that's a massive pride, just to be able to say like, no, you have to ask those questions, yes, and then you have to actually find the answer. It's your duty to find the answer, right? And we talked about this in like Who Goes to Heaven, a very complex question, but you don't just get to say like, oh, I wasn't raised in this way, I wasn't you know what I mean? It's it's kind of like sloth, and obviously pride seeps into all these sins, but I think that's just a big level of pride, just to say like, oh yeah, but what about the Crusades, huh? Nice, dude. Sick. That's the first time someone brought that up. That's awesome. You know, it's just this like this prideful nature of like, man, I'm above this. You guys are still believing in that. And I think that's just it's so major. Same thing with, you know, left versus right. It's just this pedestal game that we keep playing with each other. And it's like, it's just never going to get anywhere.
Yeah. Now, the second capital sin, deadly sin we're going to be talking about is envy. Sometimes you hear it as jealousy. And really this, simply put, is the discontent or sadness at the excellence, the perfection, or, you know, the good that happens to somebody else. So really you're like, man, you know, somebody gets, you know, has a nice car, has nice clothes, has a good situation.
You went D1.
Yeah, exactly.
Average height.
Yeah, exactly. That you're actually sad about that. Like you're discontent, and it brings you a certain level of, you know, disquieting in your soul. And so it causes us to, you know, you talked about the divinization, that we're all called to be like God. And so there's a sense of sadness because we feel like we've been stripped or robbed, that somebody else experiencing a certain level of excellence or perfection somehow strips us away. And so it's a disordered view of that kind of ache for that divinity. And really that's kind of rooted in, where does our dignity lie? Mm-hmm. And so when you think about envy, it's, you know, one way to look at it, the way I've been kind of meditating on it is that for whatever reason, we think that our value, identity, our purpose, or self-worth comes from the things that we, you know, accumulate, from a title, from a position, from the number of follows or likes, you know, because I mean, when you get 47 YouTube views on your podcast, I mean, it can really get your head, you know what I mean? That's like, there's probably a lot of people out there that are envious of the PPK podcast right now, the World of Blaze platform.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I just want you to, it's all right. One day you'll get there. One day you get there. So
actually in 3 days you'll get there. If you just keep on going.
Yeah. Matter of fact, if you pay some bots, you'll easily, yeah, there's plenty of people that get you those likes. But, you know, we think about, again, this concept, I think the world is full of this because we're matter of fact, if you know anything about Father Robert Spitzer, he's one of our favorite priests, and he writes a book on the 4 levels of happiness. And he talks about the second level being the self-ego comparison. The first level is really the base level of just the pleasure, right? So that everybody, and he says 70% of people are stuck in that level 1, level 2. And the level 3, level 4 is, because there's 4 ways to say happiness in Latin, but that level 3 is actually doing something for somebody else, going outside of yourself, which is the virtue that we would talk about, that element of kindness and charity. And then the 4th is like the sublimitas, where it's actually transcendent, and you're actually going above and beyond just service to your fellow man. You're actually going to, obviously, the all-powerful God. So this idea of envy really is trying to find your dignity in who you are as a beloved son or daughter of God, and resting in that and getting away from the kind of like this self-ego comparison. Meeks, what do you got to say about that one? On envy?
I think envy is a quite interesting one. Maybe this doesn't necessarily apply. I think it would apply, but I think when we live in an age of social media and just constant, just consuming, it can be really, really, really tough. And I think envy, maybe not in the sense that like, you know, I think maybe for guys it's an issue. I just envy people that are just, you know, normal height. That's all I envy people of a little bit. But I don't generally go on Instagram saying like, oh, dude, I wish I was, you know, had his life per se. But there's definitely things where you're like, that'd be pretty sick, you know? And it can kind of, I think just that little acknowledgement can put you in a very far back place where you're losing your peace, you know, slowly you'll start losing your peace in the sense of like, I'm like, it is pretty hot out here. It'd be nice to be in someone, you know, a place at 65 right now. It's just those little things that can rob your peace, which I think is pretty massive. Or just going on and like, let's just say you go to a certain website that you like a Uniqlo or something, right? I get a lot of stuff from Uniqlo. I'm like, this looks pretty sweet. It's just that constant state of like, what I have is not enough, you know? So I think that's a big thing of envy that I would personally struggle with. And I think that's probably more common for, you know, people today.
Well, I think one of the things that helped me is like the Turo app, right? Like I'm, you know, instead of me getting like the Kia Sophia, like I'm gonna go get me a Lambo, right? There's a temptation that I'm gonna get a Lambo. I'm gonna just show up there and be like, dang, what kind of, John's kind of rolling kind of deep. So anyway.
Oh, who are those 47 views? Jeez, dude. George Soros, Bill Gates.
Yeah, I mean the same thing Mika was saying. It's just it's like a hamster wheel of the grass is always greener.
Yeah.
and you're just never getting out of it, man. And it will get you. You know, it's every day of seeing that person has this, or why don't I have that? It really it's stems from pride and the self-loathing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like there's no satisfaction, and then we lose the sense of gratefulness. So yeah, it'll get you, and it's the day-to-day battles of the, like Miko was saying, the little things.
Yeah, and I think the social media has just exacerbated that issue, right? Because just the number of filters, and you don't get to see the real person, right? Like getting in, and the authenticity and sincerity of folks have just gone away, and people just like to project and portray a certain image that's really not them. You know, it's just causing so much. I think the flip side of this is that's not where your dignity is rooted in. Therefore, that's why so many people are depressed and suicidal and whatnot, because they don't get that, right? So even the devil's telling you can do better, you can be better, you can look better. So
one final thing,
yeah.
You think about social media in general, and you think about the longing. Why are people envious of other people who have these perfect, like, goods or, you know, talents, or their face or their body is perfect, right? Because ultimately they recognize that they desire. I mean, you desire God, who's perfect beauty, right? And they get this sense of like, I'm not worthy. I'm not getting likes unless I look like this facade of perfection, which is not even attainable, really. I mean, it's unrealistic, and it's often fake, right? So we have this ache of like, I desire perfection, I desire beauty, but I'm looking at it through a lens of a filter, and I'm not actually looking upwards towards a God who's actually the source of all perfection and beauty, right? Completely misguided. But if you get in touch with that longing, like, yeah, you desire perfection, you desire true beauty, you desire to be known and seen, right? It's just, if it's misguided, then you envy this person, rather than looking upwards, right?
Yeah, it's a key point, because I think what you're pointing to is the fact that we all have a sense written in us of what truth, goodness, and beauty really is, right? So when you see something, you can say that, man, that's beautiful, like that, or you know, when you know justice, when you experience it, because you know injustice, right? And it's like evil, right? Evil is the deprivation of the good, just like, you know, ugliness is the deprivation of beauty. And so we know it. There's a sense of that intuitively we know something that is the perfected beauty, truth, and goodness.
Yeah. I was thinking, because the antidote said kindness, but I mean, maybe a little bit just of gratitude, and not like the way that's like, hey, at least you're not a kid in Africa. It's kind of gratitude, but it's like, you know, really being like, okay, I woke up today. If you really, you know, I think that's what the saints are like. Wow, you know, God gave me this pain today to take on. Yeah. All right, dude. Which brings me to a good point of wrath for the next one. And, you know, I don't know if that just happened, you know, to fall on me, just, you know, God's being funny, or that just happened that way. But I guess the definition would be like an inappropriate response to an injustice, right? Done to yourself, done to your neighbor, if we had to define it. And sort of, I guess the antidote there would just be a little patience. So, I don't know, good one for me, I guess. So obviously it's like that enables us to sort of take that step back, right? To be thoughtful, to make an actual appropriate response, to say, okay, there's something happening here. There's something that ticked me off. There's an injustice to me in some weird way. Let me just take 5 seconds to really process it, and then let me go on and now make an appropriate response. And obviously we can talk about that. You know, personally, I think we all kind of get it in a certain way, but it is really interesting to look at the wrath of you look at the climate of today and the wrath of a certain side when things aren't said. You know what I mean? I think it's important for us to not obtain that same wrath when something happens to us that we disagree with, because we're seeing it so prevalent, you know, and those conversations where it's about faith and you can kind of get into it with a coworker or whoever it may be, and you see the anger kind of seep in, you're like, whoa, you know, what's going on in there? You know what I mean? And it's this sort of lack of, you know, we talked about it a million times, your lack of sort of individual justice becomes social justice, but it's also like your lack of patience, or maybe just, you know, your ability to be mature and handle something that maybe just didn't go your way. And that can be seen in obviously a greater scale in what we see of the political climate today, but it's also seen, as we pointed out a million times, and everyone else does, just driving down the road, someone cutting you off, whatever it may be.
Well, you know, St. Thomas Aquinas will talk about this, and and we won't go into the 6 daughters of wrath, but what he talks about is that anger is a good thing when it's ordered appropriately. What does that mean? It means that there's extremes. It's when the issue with the sin of wrath is when you have a disproportionate response to an issue. So often I use the example, especially when I'm dealing with men and fathers in particular, is like you come in and you're getting home from work and you step on the Lego that your 2-year-old left on the floor, and you stub your foot and you lose your mind.
That's brutal.
Yeah, it's brutal. I mean, I've done it, right? Thanks you guys. You guys kept me on my toes, right? So I've done it before, but then you lose your mind like the 2-year-old meant to put it right there just so you can step on it, right?
Just for you. Welcome home, Pops.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just for you. I'm like, can't wait for Dad to get home, right? I'm
gonna get him.
I can't wait. Hold on, let me poop on myself. Yeah, I'm gonna go put this Lego in front of the door, right? It's that disordered response. The other flip side to us, and you bring this up, is what we see in the culture, especially, right? I'm thinking about most recently, like the Kanye West, and Candace Owens wearing the, White Lives Matter shirt. Everybody's losing their mind, right? You're promoting extremism. But yet when you see extremism out there, like, people murdering, robbing, looting, burning down churches, burning down pregnancy centers, we don't do anything. So St. Thomas Aquinas will say, you'll look at that, right? You'll look at no response to true injustice is evil. No anger shown at all. You're silent. And they'll say that the other side of that, where you're losing your mind. I think about my brother, Mark Houck, who faces 11 years in prison for sticking up for his 12-year-old son because a pro-abortion loser was making derogatory statements at his 12-year-old son. I know, and you guys aren't even 12. Somebody make a statement to you guys, come at me, right? So what would happen is, so you look at the injustice there, and what's happening is that they're overreacting. It's being politicized. We know that. And yet you see that's where the sin lies, is that those people that are doing those things have a disordinate response to a situation. Keone, what do you have to say about wrath?
Just real quickly, I think it's when you lose any access to empathy when you're angry, then I think at that point it becomes disproportional, right? If I no longer see that person as a person, whoever wronged me, or whoever is this group of people wronging, and you lose access to empathy, well, then most likely the way you're going to go about it is no longer trying to find a proactive solution that's godly. It's probably just trying to escape the situation out of your anger or impatience or pride. So it's just something to keep in mind, is that when we have that wrath, and when you step on that 2-year-old, your son was no longer your 2-year-old son at that moment. It was it was this object that impeded your day from sitting on the couch and drinking a cold one, right?
Yeah.
Like that's really what it was. I lost empathy that it was a 2-year-old. I completely lost touch.
Yeah.
So just keeping in mind the idea of empathy, and how, once you lose sight of that, you're probably flooded, and your wrath is now disproportional.
Yeah. One last point, because we're using the thumbnail for the movie Seven. I guess Kevin Spacey, dude, it's hilarious that it's him. Sweet guy, dude, honestly. Anyways, his character, it's literally, his wrath. He sees the injustice that these people have done through the 7 deadly sins and feels like he has to take it into his own hands. And so that's kind of the point of the movie. Interesting. Worth the watch, maybe? I don't know. I don't like to sort of throw out the, at your own discretion, man. So the next one we got is Sloth. It's an interesting definition here. I'm not really sure how I pull this one out. I would say, you could, if you want. I think it's at least some sort of, it looks like just a longing for harmony and sort of peace. Like you just, you want to be exactly where you are. I don't know. Do you have a better definition? I think we all know what a sloth is, but
yeah, I think that's simply put, right? You're wanting that harmony, that peace, and it's almost like it's a comfort in where you're at.
Yeah.
Well, it says that this is divine. So it says that, what you're actually longing for, obviously, is the peace that stems from the original unity and harmony that we had before the fall. So that's a really good way of putting it. So obviously, anybody, when we're lazy, dude, we want that harmony of that bed and those sheets on our, on our body, man. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really what it is, just to be in that space of like, I don't want to say necessarily comfort. Yeah, it is comfort, but I guess it's like being where you are, and that kind of security that you're in that place.
Yeah, I think it's when you think about, like, okay, I know Christopher West talks about this eternal circular love, right, between the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? Mm-hmm. We're meant to enter into that, right? And in the beginning, we were completely in touch with God, in that we received His gift fully, and we responded to that gift fully. But when we're in touch with that, well, we know that there's this, like, we trusted in God the Father so much that we were just receptive to it, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's almost this sense of simple receptivity, right? But I think sloth is like, it just ends there in our brokenness and it becomes distorted. Like I'm just going to sit here, right? I'm on the couch. Things are feeling good, man. I'm just going to receive this. But there's no response of me being a gift now. We miss the next part of the equation, right? It's like, okay, you received this good. Now go give yourself. Right.
Yeah.
And I think it just kind of ends there.
Yeah. And you see it a lot. I mean, I was there, right? Where you, I often talk about how it was a spiritual sloth where people are just comfortable in their sin. Sin feels good, right? It's easy. It's non-confrontational. I just want to go along to get along. That's kind of the sloth, right? Or you know what? I don't want to ask God because then that might actually cause me to do something.
Well, yeah, it literally says prevents us from asking God what God might want us to do out of either complete disregard for God's will or because we were afraid that if we asked him what he wanted, he might actually tell us.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so we might actually.
Yeah, so there is a saying out there that says, "Don't ask the question you don't want to hear the answer to." So that could be sloth, right? That could be sloth.
And the antidote to that is diligence. So I think that's just a good old just doing it, just doing things, and when things are tough, to continue to do them.
But in the little ways, right? And just being honest, that's the humility.
Yeah.
Right? You're saying like, I may not be able to, pray the rosary every day. I may not be in my bag right now because I barely learn how to talk to God honestly once a week. Right. But just the diligence saying, you know what, I'm going to make a conscious choice to do that little thing that I can do.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever that looks like. And I think that's the way out. Because I think when we dive into sloth, we recognize that we've gone further and further and further from accepting the gift. And when we realize that we're so far away, we want to reach perfectionism. Right. We tend to we want to reach perfection, but we do it by perfectionism. We say okay, now I need to go all the way to the ultimate end tomorrow because, oh man, I slipped. And what happens? And then we end up failing miserably because we lacked humility, and then we end up self-loathing back to sloth. So I think it's being prudent and humble and saying, okay, this is my little response right now. I can do that, and working from there. That's the diligence.
Yeah. I don't know if this might be a little bit of gluttonous as overindulgence, but I know probably for our generation, at least my own personal experience, the sloth of just we talked this a ton of times, just doing things that aren't necessarily bad, but when you do them too long or too much, it can be, And so I've been reflecting on that too, where sometimes we've talked about this a ton too, where a lot of my faith can be almost sort of tasks that I want to complete. And then I go, okay, good job, Mika. You did what you're supposed to do as opposed to actively living it all the time. And the thing is too, is when you just get comfortable just going through reels or whatever, and they're really funny, dude. And a lot of them really creative and it's awesome, but it's you get lost to it. And then it feels like you overwrite all the good things that you did throughout that day. You read the gospel reflection of the day. And then the thing is now you can't even reflect on it the rest of the day because you're so caught up in different things. And Donovan Mitchell just got traded, and there's so many, there's a million things that fill in your mind that aren't always bad, but it can just put you in that place of man, you know what I mean? And it's those things are probably, if we're just trying to make it relevant for everybody, that's probably what we're all struggling with. I know I am, of that constant, and it is the little things of let's just put this down, you know what I mean? Maybe I'm not going to look at my phone for the first hour of the day I wake up, whatever those little decisions are going to be absolutely massive. And if we're talking about sloth, because obviously the biggest people in the world right now are the motivators and the self-starters and the Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, and what's that one game? Tony Gibbons or Robbins? What's his name?
Tony Robbins. Yeah.
That guy, even though it's a little bit past his time, but those kind of guys.
He's been doing it.
Yeah, those kind of guys, David Goggins, these guys are the biggest. So it's have the right idea, do things when you don't want to do them. And then now just applying that to everyday life, good luck, dude.
But the interesting thing about that, because that's the indirect self-love. That's a self-reliance. It's all for getting ahead. It's going to get into, obviously, this probably ties into greed, right? So we won't.
Yeah. So the next one, deadly sin, is greed. So greed, simply put, is just the inordinate desire for, just say, riches, material goods, right? And I think the idea, the longing here is, I guess, is trust. Trust in that the work that you're doing has merit, right? And has purpose. When I don't believe that there's purpose there, what do I do? Well, I'm seeking the meaning behind it, and I'm going to keep acquiring and acquiring, hoping that I finally attain that meaning. But then I completely misread the identity and perspective of it to begin with. And I end up in this endless cycle of acquiring. And maybe at the end, I'll be more worthwhile, right? Then my worth or my merit or my purpose will be revealed. Well, because, first I invested in that duplex, and then I went to an apartment, and now I'm in commercial. And eventually, if I reach a certain state, then I'll be the work will pay off. Then I'll feel this satisfaction, right? It's that sense of like this never ending acquisition that the work that I do, I can't simply rest in, right? And it's the idea, and I think it's from original sin, in that we were drawn to work in cooperation with God. But what happens in pride, it becomes toil. And it's like that, the sweat of the brow, right? And we're feeling the grind. And then when we fall in love with the grind, then we think the grind is our answer. So I'm going to grind and grind and grind. And it becomes my God is the grind. So I'm going to acquire everything, right? And then it becomes, well, I have this car. Well, now I can be really smart, right? And then I can, I can get 2 cars, and then I can get an electric car. And then you're justifying so much of just acquiring, right? And so I think the antidote is generosity. And I even think for myself, as a single income of the home, right? And seeing money in the right way, what better way to do that than to tithe?
Yeah.
Right? When we think of generosity, God is so good in the wisdom of the church, right? He knows that this is not yours. And it doesn't mean God is trying to punish you, but he knows that it's trusting, like in the parable, right? Like, the birds, do you think they worry that they won't get fed?
Yeah.
How much more does he care about you? He gave you a share in his divinity. And you think he doesn't care about whether or not you have, a comfortable home, or you have the means to provide for your children? Like, he doesn't care. It's this idea that we lack trust, right? And so I think the antidote to that is being generous in little ways, recognizing that this dollar bill isn't my worth. But it was a gift, and I can give that gift, and it rightly orders how I perceive the work that I do.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of it goes back to, when Jesus was asked about, paying taxes to Caesar, right? Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God. And I think just to kind of highlight the greed pieces, when the possessions, the material wealth become an end in and of itself, right? Because obviously money isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's what you do with it. Is it ordered appropriately? Mm-hmm. So I think we got plenty of examples of greediness out there for sure.
Yeah. The money situation, which I think obviously greed stems into other things, but as Americans, it's probably our biggest issue, because it's, morally irresponsible not to have multiple incomes or all this kind of stuff, the stuff that we've been fed for so long, and the financial freedom and all that kind of stuff. And I came up with this pretty cool quote once, that financial freedom is like not when you have enough, it's when you realize that like then money was never yours in the first place. Yeah. Because that's just a journey I've been on. And same thing with Keone, when I have this idea of here's how much debt we're gonna have, and I eventually, once we have kids, we'll be a single income thing. But I really want to do ministry, and it's so easy to just get caught up in all of these things. And we've all talked about this, but you just lose opportunity for faith. If you had everything figured out, you wouldn't need faith, which is why all of Hollywood doesn't need it, and they drink baby's blood and stay young forever. You know what I mean? So it's like, in those moments, it's just an opportunity to be fully dependent. And then I'll just say this. One last thing too, for people who are really interested in this sort of money topic and how to have a sort of better relationship with it. And I think, what does the church really say? Or what does Thomas Aquinas say? I really encourage everybody to check out New Polity, because they have completely changed the way I probably view all of my life. And I think it'd just be beneficial for every Catholic to sort of understand what the Catholic Church actually says about money. How should we use it? Mm-hmm. And then the way that we can, uphold each other as a community, as opposed to, just stacking up your 401k or all this other stuff. That's just like, it kind of gets annoying. You know what I mean?
Well, we're in this individualistic, where we're just all about our own. So
the next one on the list, we're almost there, is gluttony. So I think, most people think of it in regards to food. I guess there's sayings, right? You're a glutton for attention, or you're a glutton for pain, or what have you. But I think the easiest way to describe it is in regards to food. And I think there's 2 routes. A lot of people, either they overindulge, right? So they don't care about what goes into their body. I think that one's kind of easy, right? You're a glutton, so you're just overeating. You don't really care. You're not having any sort of self-control, right? Whatever. The other one that I think is really getting more and more popular, probably in the last decade or two, is the what's called preciousness, or like caring too much about your food, almost where it becomes like this religion, right? Like whatever diet that you go into, or whatever, food you're cutting out, or perspective on everything, and it becomes almost this food is too emphasized, right? So, or people who are so picky, where like they have this laundry list of things that's not even like medically necessary, but it's just because it's my belief, right? And it becomes your religion, right? And it's not seeing food as a gift, a doorway to God, right? A reminder that we're made for the eternal banquet. But no, it's my satisfaction is in that plate, right? And so the longing there, when we think of gluttony, is well-being, right? And there's all sorts of well-being. You think of well-being, right, is wanting, the pleasures of this life, right? Well-being and having a purposeful life, right? Having meaning and purpose. Well-being, psychological. I mean, that's huge right now. Mental health, right? Psychological well-being. We have 3 therapists in the family, so we're in tune with psychological well-being, having a positive view of yourself. Social well-being, right? Having connections, right? Having actual meaningful relationships that we all desire. Community is huge right now. Post-pandemic, social media, the social well-being is really lacking. So it's no wonder, what do people turn to? Is the food. It gives you this sense of physical well-being, right? Which is the last sense of well-being, is physical well-being, to be healthier, to be strong, right? And people seek that well-being in the quick fix of food, right? So what is the antidote? The antidote is obviously temperance. It's in seeing that, and I think Christopher West talked about it. It's the idea that whenever you have a food, right? And you had that, like, we just had chunk cookie out here in Arizona, and it is, I mean, I encourage, if there's a chunk cookie near you, all 47 of you, check it out, because it is fire, right? So, but it's that idea, when I had that last bite, it's like, dang it. Almost like there's a sense of like, it's gone, right? The sadness, right? And what we can do is, the choice that we can make is, we can, again, remember back to the diet, we can starve it. It's back like, oh, that's not there. That's whatever. I'm so in control of my diet, do this, whatever, right? Or we can indulge in it and just go get another cookie. Or we can rejoice in that cookie wasn't meant to satisfy me. It's a reminder that I'm meant to be completely satisfied in heaven. And that is simply a window. It's an icon, not an idol. And I think that's what temperance is, right? Temperance is seeing it as it is in a balanced way, and not making it God, but simply a window to God, who is ultimately going to fulfill me in the next life, right? So it doesn't have to be a pity party, but you can rejoice, and that it's going to happen. You just got to be patient. Right?
Yeah, and you have to remember too, we bought a couple bags of frozen chunk cookies, so it's not.
That's true. It will be coming. Yeah, you can always have another one tomorrow.
Yeah, the other antidote is actually not temperance. You just keep getting more. That's the other antidote, I guess.
It's to freeze them, so you don't eat it right away, but you're gonna have it tomorrow.
Hey, we're all on the journey.
Yeah,
we're all on the journey, and I kind of think Chunk Cookie named itself after me. So whatever.
Yeah.
I'll just say real quick, obviously. I think fasting, and I think a real simple one that's really good is just like, in terms of food, obviously we can get real deep if we want to, or you can get deep on your own if you'd like. Like if you think about food, right, the classic, like, just eat till you're not hungry anymore instead of eating till you're just full and can't move. I think that's a really healthy thing to do, to start doing, because you don't want to be obese or anything like that. It might be something health. Anyways, in that way, but I think I think it can really change your perspective just on things in general, because I think especially in our, fast food and really obese country that we are in, and just this constant need to like fulfill ourselves. It's when you have that perspective of like, you know what, that wasn't great. I just went to the calf in Steubenville. It's not awesome, but all good. You know what I mean? And I think that can just be a healthy perspective to have in general, because I think about when are we the most angry? Probably, when something isn't directly happening to us, it's just when we're hungry. So it's just huge, and then we can give that up, and then you start getting to fasting, which is obviously a massive thing of importance for us as Catholics. And
well, it's such a good point, because I think the culture tries to push, now they're trying to normalize obesity, right? And I think, this, it's just, you think about all of the 7 deadly sins, think about what the culture is saying about it. They're screaming from the mountaintops about how we want to make it normal, that it's quite okay to overindulge. And it's not about being comfortable in your body. It's about a free license to do whatever you want to do, when you want to do it, how you want to do it, to the extent you want to do it, which isn't freedom. That's slavery.
All right. Last but not least, man, good old lust.
Oh,
Yeah. And so, I mean, honestly, I think the simplest way to think of lust is treating yourself and others as an object, a source of your own pleasure or good, right? And the longing, I think it's beautiful too. When you think about the longing, right? I think it's important to remember as we're going through these that you're not suppressing the longing. The longing is good. The more you get in touch with the longing and rightly order it to God himself, the more it actually becomes less distorted and more perfected. Right? So we think of this longing, underneath lust is the longing for communion, right? To be seen and known and loved, to have someone given to me and I can receive that and then become a gift, right? And that's eternal communion. That's the marriage that we're called to in heaven, right? Where we join into the Holy Trinity, which is this never ending cycle of giving and receiving, right? It just reminds me of, isn't that Joey from Friends?
Yeah. When he's going to be, he's going to like officiate the wedding for one of them. Yeah.
giving
And
receiving.
yeah. But I don't know why that comes to mind every time.
Or Robert Snyder doing that. It's a circle. That's a good one too. I now pronounce you Chuck and Larry.
But yeah, that's really what it is understanding that, we were meant to be a gift to others. And that's the antidote, is chastity. Right? And a lot of people think chastity is the suppression of that longing. It's really not. Right? It's using it at the right time in the right way with the right person. And that's in all relationships, not even an intimate relation, like a sexual relationship. Right? But it's how can I love this person at the right time and in the right way. Right? And I think, I know Christopher West talked about the idea of chastity, and he talked about the pianist. Did you watch that episode?
I may
Where
have,
he said, how people who are chaste,
Oh yeah.
right?
Oh,
They
yeah.
don't. How can they make beautiful love, right? Instead of just being loud and like being like erotic in today's term, right? How can people who are chaste like really fulfill the passion of love, right? And what he said is he basically goes up and plays the piano and he just starts banging on the keys.
Yeah.
He's like, anyone can make noise, right? And then he had someone who went up and played a beautiful piano piece. He's actually played. He's like, how did you play that beautiful song? Well, practice, diligence, sacrifice. He's like, that's chastity. It's saying in the little moments, I'm going to die to myself because it's not the right time. And when the time comes to do that, whether it's the marital embrace or whether it's, consoling someone else, you've practiced. And so your love is perfect, or at least as perfect as it can be, given your state in life and where you're at in your spiritual journey. That's the chaste way. And it's no longer seen now as like, just ignore like the urge, like just act like it's not there. Right. But you're in touch with it and knowing that there's something you can do with it. Right. There's another way. You don't have to indulge in it, but you don't have to act like it's not there. Yeah. That it's meant to be there because you're meant for eternal communion.
Yeah, I think you bring up, and this is why I encourage everybody to really break into theology of the body, because it has so much depth to it. And of course, Christopher West and TOB Institute, people like Bill Donahue, they've kind of broken open this, but it's really from the mind of JP2. And, talk about redeemed eros, not suppressing it, but redeeming that desire, rightly ordered towards really God. But you brought up this thing about seeing. And Christopher West talks about being seen, not looked at. And I think that's the part with the lust piece is today's world would say we see each other as tools, not as temples of God, temples of the Holy Spirit. And I think that's just another way to be able to say, like, we have to get back pre-fall and have the eyes of Adam where he saw Eve as the best part of himself, right? Bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, which that's a superlative. They didn't have superlatives. So when they said that, that meant this was to the greatest part of me, right? We saved the 3 times for God. But when we say bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, Adam was saying pre-fall. Adam was saying that Eve was the best part of me. And so seeing one another as the person that they are and really as a gift from God.
Yeah, I think, just a quick point being that what we've been saying is like there's always sort of like 3 responses, and it's to completely shun it, like it's not a thing, which is, common. And a lot of, I think what sort of like Protestantism kind of made that really popular in America. And there's just like, basically now our world, which is just overindulgence and everything. And as long as it moves, it's game, I guess. And then there's just like rightly ordering it. And that's the whole point, So it's not to shame anybody as if like, oh, you deal with temptations. Nice, Satan. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Go to hell. Or it's like, okay, yeah, we all get that. And so, and I remember just being in like the confession, and then, you know, a priest being like, you know, you're like this, we all feel the same things, dude. It's just about like, you know what I mean? Like acknowledging in a way like, oh, you know, thank you, God, this person's beautiful. You know, just because I'm a priest doesn't mean all of a sudden I'm just asexual and I'm, you know, and just, oh, yeah, you know what I mean? It's like we all feel it, which is a good thing. And I think probably something that we missed as a church and preaching to people, because it's a frightening thing and it's really hard because you want to have that, you know, control. Be like, guys, don't fall into it. And I'll just say, as you know, if you've been a viewer of this, you know, I have a really bad habit of watching reality TV with my wife, and I swear for so many of them though, it's always like this: I've been cheated on in every relationship. I think what's important is not to be like, you know, obviously, you know, you might deserve that in a certain way because you did whatever, but that's not the point. It's just like recognizing that, like, hey, maybe this theory that I've had my whole life isn't just the right one. You know, I think that's all if you're thinking about sort of how do I approach this topic, and something that, you know, Jason Everett or Christopher West do an awesome job of, it's just making you realize that it's disorder. It's not going to give you the end that you want it to, you know, and I think that's the most important thing when you're thinking about it, because if you can't learn to really hate the sin or see why it's disordered, then you'll never be able to overcome it. The first step, understand that, like, all right, man, maybe this isn't going to work out for me.
Yeah, and I think that's what we were trying to do. That's right. Give you the underlying, you know, what's the longing there, so that you're not just trying to, because again, that's the churches suffer from Manichaeism, right? You think about the puritanic view of things. I mean, even Buddha, you think about the 8 different ways. It's like, you know, it's soul good, body bad. How do I separate them? And that's not the way God made us. He made us as a body soul composite. And so I think it's just helping us understand what the longing is, so you can better understand it, name it, tame it, and then understand how you can, you know, redeem that in a virtuous way. Any parting words, Keone?
No, I think it's just asking yourself throughout the day, whatever struggle you're having, like, Lord, where are you right now? Right, getting in touch with the situation where He is, but also in your heart, right? If you're struggling with anger, like, Lord, what is this ache for justice? Right? Or if I'm struggling with lust, Lord, where is this ache for communion or beauty or being a gift, right? And it's not a bad thing that you're having the ache, right? But it's how we respond to that. And so I think that question alone is almost so freeing. Instead of like, oh shoot, I felt the temptation, dude. What am I gonna do? I gotta put a plug on it, right? And it's like, no, dude, like it's a beautiful thing when it's rightly ordered, right? So just accepting it as a gift first and foremost. Offering it to God, including Him in, because oftentimes we have it, we're trying to fight it. Like, God no longer becomes part of it. It's like, well, I'll see you when I battle this demon. And I'll see you on the other side of the door, God. And say, no, thank you, Lord, that I desire communion so much. Help me to fulfill it through you, right? It becomes a prayer. Like, it's an icon, not an idol. I think just having that perspective in the day-to-day battles, keep talking about the little way, you can really get in touch with that eros, right? That fire in your heart, that true ache for God, and it'll be lived out in abundance, in whatever your state in life is.
Yeah, I'm talking to myself probably on this one more than anyone else, but I think that maybe one of the antidotes to all 7 is probably just silence, you know, just being able to give yourself the time to sit there. Like we talk about the patience for wrath or whatever. I think if you can give yourself some time in silence, or just some time to ask yourself questions like Keone said just right now in his parting words. And I think that's probably a really massive one, because if you can give yourself the time to slow down, a lot of times you probably just make a better decision. But also, you'll be able to like reflect on the things like a podcast and be able actually to hear those things. Unlike me, you know what I mean? I go and I'll do these morning prayers, and then next thing I know, I'm just, you know, trying to figure out how the Jazz can really, you know, get to the top 3 seed this year in the Western Conference. It's like, well, that's because you listen to Bill Simmons again, Miko. And so I think that's a big thing, is like giving yourself the time and space to actually be able to do something. Because if not, it's like, you know, that's why the saints and everybody is so obsessed with silence, because it's like, otherwise you can't hear God, you can't do anything.
Yeah, I know. So we covered again the 7 deadly sins, or no, the 7 capital sins. It was interesting when we were preparing for the show, because I found that there was actually an 8th deadly sin. And it was, and I think you had alluded to this in several episodes about that, right? Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, I think it was like not, you know, watching the podcast or
something. It was, it's
avoiding the time it takes to watch a podcast and like it. I forget what it
but it was specific to the World of Blaze PPK podcast.
Yeah, for some reason.
It was weird. I was just like, how did the ancient, you know, like the ancients, all of them consider all of that and say, you know, how do we, how are we going to further our virtuous life by, you know, liking and following the World Ablaze podcast. So hopefully this is, we're just kidding. Obviously, some of you are taking it seriously. You're writing down number 8. We didn't mean that. We're just kidding. 7 deadly sins, 7 capital sins. Hopefully this was helpful for you. Understand the longing. God loves you. He wants better from you. So we appreciate you being with us. Like, follow, share, do what you need to do. Comment, subscribe. You know how we do it. Get holy or die trying. God's peace.